What's going on, everybody? Jared Sandler welcoming you into another episode of the Just a Sec Conversation. We've got episode 66 with Oakland Athletics manager Bob Melvin. Bo Mel, as his players call him, is one of the more highly regarded managers in baseball. He's won a Manager of the Year award. He's been the manager of the Oakland A's for a long, long time, since 2011. He's had a lot of success. He was a former major leaguer as a catcher. He grew up in the Bay Area, has some great stories, and was really excited to get the chance to speak to Bob prior to this season. And looking forward to you getting the chance to hear what he has to say. Just a reminder, would really love if you'd consider subscribing, liking, commenting, or just taking the link and passing it on to some friends who you think might be interested. All of that stuff really does go a long way, and I'd really appreciate if you would consider supporting me and supporting this project in that way. But without further ado, here we go. Episode 66 of the Just a Sec Conversation with the manager of the Oakland Athletics, Bob Melvin.
All right, Bob, so the first thing I always like to ask people, when you think back to your childhood experiences, influences, interests, hobbies, whatever it might be, you can take it in whatever direction you'd like, but what are the things that, you know, as we talk today, really stand out to you about that time in your life?
Well, I grew up in the Bay Area, and if you're a sports fan and you play sports, I don't know that there's a better area to grow up in. You know, you have a basketball team, you have two football teams, you have two baseball teams. You've got it all in the Bay Area. So I was lucky enough to grow up there, and I was just a sports nut. I mean, I during baseball season, that was my favorite sport. During basketball season, that was my favorite sport, and same thing during football season, golf, tennis, everything else. So I feel like I grew up the right way as far as being, you know, exposed to all the different sports, and you know, one came to the forefront a little bit later down the road.
What pushed you to baseball maybe over all the others? You know,
I guess it was just the one I was the best at, and people were telling me that. I mean, I really wanted to play basketball. I obviously would not have done maybe as well as I did in the baseball field. But when you're in high school, difference between baseball and basketball, you're playing a packed gym. It's really exciting. Baseball, there's barely anybody in the stands. So in high school, basketball was my favorite sport.
So if I'm not mistaken, if I've got the times right, there were some really good Oakland Athletics teams when you were growing up in Northern California. Were you an A's fan, and what do you remember maybe about some of those teams?
Well, I was a little bit of a fair weather fan, to tell you the truth. Being in the Bay Area, you were allowed to do that. And so, yeah, 72, 73, 74, you know, I'm 11, 12, 13 years old, or 10, a year younger than that. They were amazing teams, and, you know, just and they were so colorful, and they were, you know, they fought, and they, you know, the uniforms, and it was the first time, you know, I really paid that close attention, and what a terrific team it was, and entertaining. So, yes, I was very much a A's fan back in the early 70s.
Whether it's baseball or any of the other sports, were there any athletes that kind of captivated you, or you sort of try to connect with just as a fan watching them?
Yeah, you know, we used to play like wiffle ball games and Nerf ball games, and you'd pick a lineup, and whoever was hitting, you had to try to mimic the style and so forth. But, you know, Sal Bando was always a guy that I watched with the A's teams at a young age, and just his determination and how clutch he was, and he was the captain of the team, and, you know, just all of those things kind of resonated with me. And then I was lucky enough to spend some time with him later on, and he ended up being a big influence in my career. So, it starts probably with Sal Bando.
All right, so I heard you're a big classic rock fan. Best concert you've been to?
Well, I'll tell you what, if you go back and look it up, the Oakland Coliseum, where I currently work, was the best venue for outdoor concerts back in the 70s. The Days on the Green, Bill Graham's Days on the Greens, and they were famous for multiple, rock bands, and so I had the opportunity to go to a lot of those. At a very young age, I still think back, and I wasn't a huge Grateful Dead fan, but I was a huge Who fan. And Grateful Dead and the Who, I think it was back in 1975, and I was really young still, was probably the best concert I've went to. But, you know, Peter Frampton was there, and Fleetwood Mac was there, and the Doobie Brothers, and Leonard Skinner, and all those bands came through on Day in the Greens. And those are the times I remember the most as far as musically, and that's all that's up in my office in Oakland are pictures of the Days on the Greens back in the 70s.
Is there a band or a concert, a show you never got to see that you wanted to, or one that maybe you still could that you haven't had the chance to see yet?
No, Zeppelin. That's never going to happen again, and I never got to see Led Zeppelin. I saw Robert Plant at the Greek Theater in Berkeley, and he played a couple of Zeppelin tunes, which is probably as close as I'll get to, but that's the band that I missed that I like the most that unfortunately I didn't get to see.
All right, now your daughter's got a career on the entertainment side. What's it like for you to be able to follow her career and her journey?
Yeah, and she's just done so many things from the Lee Strasberg in New York to what she's doing right now with JDRF. And, she's very creative. She's very smart. She's well-rounded in her background and what she's done over her career. And she's really settled into a great role now with JDRF, which works very well for her and resonates due to the fact that she's type 1 diabetic as well. So it's cool to be able to support them and be involved in it and watch my daughter do her thing.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you about your involvement there. I guess with any community effort, you're there to support and give back, but I think a lot of times maybe you learn something from those experiences. I'm curious, with your involvement in JDRF, what are some of the takeaways you've had just from whatever experiences you've shared through that organization?
Yeah, well, not only the knowledge for what my daughter goes through, and my wife's a very knowledgeable as well as I am in what my daughter goes through, but actually for my own good as far as what I'm eating, and I've had some blood sugar issues too, and how to monitor that and keep yourself at a better level. So, we've been fortunate enough to know how to deal with our bodies, so to speak, as far as eating and so forth, and a lot of that stems from being educated, with my daughter being type 1.
All right, so as a player, Bob, you played for a number of different organizations, which means you're exposed to different coaches and teammates and philosophies and perspectives. As a player, who were some of the people that influenced you, whether it was, how to go about things as a player or maybe things that you do now as a manager?
Yeah, I was lucky enough. One thing is, I wasn't good enough to stick around with a club for too long, but once I got into free agency, I moved around a little bit. My days coming up with the Tigers, Kirk Gibson, Lance Parrish, and those guys took such good care of me over there. Alan Trammell. I came up behind a World Series team and ended up, playing in '85, the year after the World Series was my rookie year, and playing with those guys, and learned a lot how to play the game. Sparky was the manager there, and then, my days with the Giants, guys like Bob Brenly and Mike Krukow and Mike Aldretti, and there's so many guys in the Giant organization. We had some great teams there and some really good clubhouses. As far as my playing days goes, and had some good years with Baltimore, where, kind of looking towards the end of my career, and now all of a sudden I'm looking at guys like Frank Robinson and Johnny Oates, who were big influences on me too, not just a playing level anymore, kind of watching how they did things too. So I was lucky enough to be around those type of people.
I guess when you're growing up, when you dream of being a professional athlete, you dream of doing it for your favorite team, and a lot of time that's the hometown team, and you're currently managing, I guess, one hometown team in Oakland, and you got to play for another. How special have those experiences been?
It's really amazing, and the older I get, the more you realize how incredible that is. And to get, in my coaching career, to get involved with Sal Bando and Phil Garner in Milwaukee, before I started managing, and they really were the two big influences on me as far as my managing career goes. So yeah, being able to do that at home and be at home and know that your friends and people that you grew up with are watching every day. There's no feeling like that. Obviously, when your teams are doing well, it's great. When you're not, it's tough to do at home. But man, what a great experience that I've had and continue to in Oakland.
So, Bob, a lot of your players talk about your ability to connect with them, and I'm not going to ask you to toot your own horn, but I'm just curious from your own perspective, what are the things that you feel like are important in developing a relationship with your players and in the type of setting that you have as a big league manager?
Yeah, it's just kind of, I don't think it's anything that I it's just kind of who I am, and who I am is based on some of the relationships and some of the things that I've seen, coming up as a player and a coach. And, I've always been known to be a pretty good clubhouse guy as a player. And as a manager, it's been easy to communicate with players based on my experiences and how guys like Roger Craig, communicated with me, and how Frank Robbins communicated with me. It's just something that came pretty easily to me once I started managing. And I think the guys appreciate that I'm able to step into their shoes and know what they're going through, being from experience that I've had, and also just kind of that's who I am. And I think it's the first step along the way is to really know what guys are going through and identify that, and I think the guys appreciate it.
All right, so before you had your first managerial gig, you were a scout and had some coaching opportunities along the way, and one of them was with Arizona, and you were part of that Diamondbacks team that won the World Series with Johnson and Schilling, and Luis Gonzalez had the big hit and all that stuff. I'm just curious what that experience was like, and how, that was such an interesting year because of 9/11 and facing the Yankees in the World Series and President Bush throwing out the first pitch and all the things that were a part of that year that made it unique. What was it like for you from your perspective?
Those years don't come along very often, if ever. And I was living in Arizona at the time too, and went on to manage the Diamondbacks later. But that team was so unique. It was like a bunch of mercenaries, a little bit older in their career, came together in one place to do one thing, and that was win a World Series. And you look at everybody on that team, from Mark Grace and Matt Williams and Curt Schilling and Randy Johnson and Luis Gonzalez and Steve Finley and Reggie Stanton. You go on and on and on. It was a veteran team, and I really had I felt a closeness to those guys as the bench coach because I hadn't been coaching very long. I played against all these guys too. So we had a great relationship with the coaching staff, with what the job Bob Brenly did in his first year, guys like Bob Welch on the coaching staff. We had such great rapport with our team that they really appreciated that, and they felt it, and we had a good pulse on these guys, and ended up being a magical year, just the year alone, let alone what took place in the World Series in New York and after 9/11. It's just an incredible year that we could talk about probably for hours.
So one thing I want to ask, and I don't know if there's a way to put this into words, but I know, I'm fortunate enough to get to broadcast for my hometown team and the Rangers. And so when, there are big moments in the booth, like on the broadcast, I've got to contain myself, but inside my heart's pounding. I can only imagine what it's like. I know that as a player and a coach, you're supposed to, keep that heartbeat kind of, as even keel as possible. But when you're in a situation where you could walk off to win the World Series, not just a regular season game or anything leading up to that, but the World Series, what do you remember about what you were feeling in the dugout leading up to that moment?
Well, I'll tell you, it all came down to the ninth inning in Game 7, and we had a lot going on in that dugout. I really looked up at the last second. I never even saw Luis Gonzalez take the swing. I looked up at the last second, saw the ball going over his head. And I can go over every step of that inning like it happened yesterday. Gracie leads off with the hit. DeLucci's the pinch hitter. Damian Miller stays in the bunt. We were going to hit for him, but with Gracie on, he bunts and throws the ball away at second. Now we got first and second. We had Durazo ready to pinch hit. We had Colburn ready to pinch hit. We ended up going with Jay Bell because he was such a good bunter. He put a bunt down. It ended up being first and third. We run on the backside with Midray Cummings. Womack doubles into the corner. So now we have a lot of things going on. And I looked at Bob and I go, how do you want this set up here if we get out of this inning tied? And he looked at me, he goes, it's not going to be tied. Just figure it out. And just as he said that, and I'm trying to figure out who goes where in the lineup because of all the changes, the ball ends up dumping in the left center field, and we didn't have to deal with that.
Was there a point that year where you guys, or maybe you just yourself, were like, this is I know you can never guarantee that it's going to happen, but this is a World Series caliber team? Was it from spring training? Was it sometime during the year? What do you remember about that?
Spring training. That's what everybody came together for. That's what everybody talked about. And Bob Brenly won the room when, with a bunch of veteran guys on his first day in spring training, his meeting to the players, he said, "Here are the rules," and pulled out a cocktail napkin, and it said, "Play hard and be on time." And that just won the room. And that's what everybody talked about from the beginning of that season to the end of that season, is we're all here for a reason this year, and that's to win a World Series.
All right, you played with some great players. You've mentioned some of those. We just talked about some of the great players that you had on the Diamondbacks team and other teams you coached, and you've gotten to manage some unreal players as well. Ichiro and Josh Donaldson, and now your current Oakland teams. I mean, Matt Chapman is about as fun to watch as anyone, and there are a number of those guys. I'm curious, who are some of the guys, and I know you can't list them all, but as best as you can, who are the guys that over your career as a coach or a manager have just stood out either because of ability or work ethic or whatever criteria is important to you?
Really hard to answer because there's probably 50 of them, and I know we can't go through that. But it starts in Seattle with Ichiro. I mean, all he needed to know was what time the game was, and he knew he was leading off, and he knew he was playing right, and he knew he was going to play every day. And to watch him and his work ethic and his commitment and to everything he did from the time he woke up until the time he went to sleep revolved around how he was going to go out there and perform and win a baseball game. To have that kind of luxury as a first-year manager to see was pretty awesome. And then, my Diamondback days, we just had so many good young players there from the Stephen Drews and Chris Youngs and Justin Uptons and Mark Reynolds and those guys. And that's where I really learned to deal with younger players. And with such great times there, especially because of the history that I had before then, too. And then you look at some of the Oakland players that we have right now. I mean, Matt Chapman's, if he stays on trajectory he's on, he's got a chance to be a Hall of Famer. Matt Olson over at first base is absolutely terrific as well. He's going to be an MVP at some point in time. To the Cal guys, Marcus Semien and Mark Canha that went to Cal where I did as well, and local guys doing well. I'm leaving a lot of guys out, but I've been fortunate to not only have, really great players, and let's not forget, the group with Cespedes and Donaldson and Moss and all those guys in those years. There's just been so many of them, and they all feel like they're a part of me still to this day. So I've been really fortunate as a manager to have the type of players that I have.
You've managed guys who are from various parts of America, and then you've managed guys who aren't, and English isn't their first language, and you mentioned Ichiro and Cespedes, and they have varying degrees of comfortability with the English language, but and I know that there's a quote-unquote baseball language, but what are some of the things you've learned over time to be able to communicate as effectively as possible with players for whom English is not their first language and maybe not even a comfortable language yet for them at that time in their career?
Yeah, the two easy examples are Ichiro and Yoenis Cespedes, and you could start right there as two of my favorite guys of all time, if not my favorite. And being able to communicate with them and get their trust early on, I felt like was important for me. And I went to Seattle before the season started, and I sat down with Ichiro for a time to let him get to know what I was all about, get to learn what he was all about. And we're still good friends to this day, our families, and Nuiko, my wife Kelly, and we're still really good friends. But I think it was important to him that I reached out to him before spring training even started and made a specific trip to see him. And I think with Yoenis, the thing that really resonated with him was I was worried about from day one with him making sure he was able to go somewhere and get a good meal and live in a place that was conducive to what we felt like he should be doing. And I was involved in that early on. And I think that resonated with him, that when he came into the ballpark in the morning in spring training and I asked him what he had for dinner and where he went and gave him some tips on places to go, I think that was kind of a hook with Yoenis.
Bob, how has the catching position changed from when you played to where it is more or less now?
Well, with analytics, it's changed considerably. A lot of the the guys that were considered catch and throw guys that had value now, back in the day, guys like me. You look at some of the WAR and some of the analytics and maybe weren't as good as or as impactful as we thought we were. Now it goes more on offense, more on framing, maybe not because of the fact there's so much information, maybe not the game callers that they used to be years back. And so it's changed in that regard. Everybody's looking for offense, and if you can give some offense as a catcher, there's always going to be a place for you. So it's changed quite a bit.
You mentioned the analytics, and not specific to that, but just in general, I think such an important part of anything you've been a part of for a long time is to be able to learn as that thing evolves, and baseball has certainly evolved. How do you go about learning and adapting?
Well, you know what? I was lucky enough to land here in Oakland, and really Billy, is I don't want to say invented it, but Oakland was the first place that analytics became really prevalent. Started with Sandy Alderson, and Billy was his right-hand man, and next thing, Paul DiBattista comes, and guys like David Force. So we're very analytically driven, and when you have a low payroll, you have to find nuances to make yourself compete with some of the big boys where you don't have money to spend like the Yankees and the Red Sox do. And I think Billy's been as good as anybody in the game at that. And one thing I have learned here recently, if you think that you've learned it all, you certainly haven't. And if you're reluctant to continue to learn, then there's not going to be a place for you in this game. And you've seen how many the turnover in managers over the last 3 or 4 years has been as significant as any time in baseball. And a lot of it has to do with understanding the analytics and buying in and selling it to your players and believing in it. Because if you don't, it shows up. So I've been able to learn quite a bit here under Billy and appreciate all his tutelage over the years. All
right, the last thing, Bob, I want to make sure to hit on. Your grandfather, I read, was the original ball boy for the Acme Packers, the precursor to the Green Bay Packers, and that brought on a really cool relationship that maybe you had with Vince Lombardi. But before we get to that, how did that come about that your grandfather was the original ball boy? Did he ever share that story and how he landed that role?
Not how he landed it. I knew about him. I still have a picture of the team with him sitting in front. But he was always a huge sports fan and came from Wisconsin. We've always been huge Packer fans. His relationship with Vince Lombardi, they were really close friends, and he was over dinner anytime they were in town playing the 49ers or, even in off seasons too. And I remember going in the backyard and playing a little catch with the football with them. And it was, I didn't realize then how cool that was. I just thought he was Mr. Lombardi, who was the coach and was out there playing catch with me. I'd go to practices, and when he was with the Redskins, I'd go to practice when they play here against the 49ers. So it was a really, really cool relationship. But it started, with my grandfather and his love of sports. He had season tickets to Giant games and Warrior games, and, so I was exposed to quite a bit at a very young age.
Well, there you go. That's episode 66 of the Just a Sec conversation with Oakland Athletics manager Bob Melvin. Special shout out to the great Zach Rowe for producing the Just a Sec podcast series. Appreciate Zach and all his hard work. And thanks to you for tuning in. Again, would really appreciate it if you would consider just taking this link and sharing it with some friends or just clicking the subscribe button. Not a lot of work, but it does go a long way in supporting this project. Thanks so much again for tuning in. Until next time, stay safe, be healthy. We'll talk to you later.